Graham Hunter, good morning to you. How you doing?
Hi, fellas. Good.
Let's start with Gareth Bale. Obviously, the power of a contract is such that you can't just sack a player. You can't get out of it unless you want to pay him up. So Gareth Bale is sitting pretty until 2022, I think. Is that right?
22. Signed in 16 when it was a deal extension. And when a club puts a guy like that at that age, a guy who'd been, even then, divided opinion, not been controversial, that asks you a question about your house management. If there was no thought in 2016, zero thought about his age, about whether they wanted to get money back, then when they put him on a deal that was to last 6 years, it wasn't a fresh deal, it was an extension, then they weren't thinking very far ahead as far as I'm concerned, Jack.
It doesn't make any sense, really, that now they've decided just to burn him out. Has his form fallen off so precipitously that there is no way he could be a contributor to that team?
No. It's absolutely the case that if you look at bursts of his form this season, the number of goals he contributed, and the way in which, if you stood back and took all the heat and the venom and the misinformation out of this campaign, and you started from scratch and say, okay, we're going to accept that he'll be at our club beyond his best athletic years because we're keeping him. If you accept that the deal for Ger's deal, let's call it the Ger deal on Gareth Bale, would have to be without Zinedine Zidane because there's no feeling between the two of them. Bale doesn't act or integrate or indeed play the way that Zidane views his team. And that's quite legitimate. That's fair enough. That's the history of all competitive sport. Coach wants one thing, player wants another. But if you take Zidane out of the picture and you say, I'm not going to build a team around Bale, but I'm going to build a team in which Bale's attributes and Bale's personality will fit, he is still athletically, competitively, in terms of his ability to go past players, his ability to score, his ability to create. It's very nearly the same Gareth Bale as they bought.
Really? Because there was definitely, the misinformation has clearly worked then, because there was a sense that Gareth Bale at this stage of his career is like the type of signing that Manchester United would make now, where they would vastly overpay for somebody who used to be amazing but who now is a shadow of their former selves. But that's not the case.
They would have to vastly overpay because, you know, as they sit, Real Madrid are not afraid of utter contradiction. That's not me being critical, that's just a matter of fact. They desperately want the wage bill reduced. They desperately want to change the profile, the attitude of the team, and it's legitimate. They should want to do so. But so their utter drive to get Gareth Bale out, which is the third time they've tried it. I mean, let's be clear about this. When Mbappe first went to Paris Saint-Germain, they tried to shift Bale to Manchester United. They gave him permission to speak to Manchester United. He turned Manchester United down. But the contrast is that despite this willingness to indulge in a malevolent media campaign about him, because they still think that might affect him, meaning that they know very little about the man, they still want money for him. They still expect big money from him. So on your scenario, if United were to come in and buy him, it would cost them a lot. But Gareth Bale, if anybody's been watching him closely rather than looking at headlines this season, there's not a lot of difference, Jer, except that, one, he's completely peed off. Two, he's playing in a very weak team. They've been irresponsible throughout most of the season. He's playing in a team whereby they're paper thin. You can push them over, and as soon as their last target's disappeared, they've hauled up the white flag. I mean, it's pretty pathetic to watch. It's not something I think any of them. Well, there are a small handful of exceptions. Bale's the way Bale's perceived, yeah, the way in which it's simple to paint him, particularly in the Madrid media, can be sourced in the fact that he's part of a losing franchise, and therefore very few people, in the way that this ripple in the pond effect, Madrid say, listen to the media, we'll owe you, we'll give you a transfer story, we'll give you an interview if you put the boot into Bale. There's very few in the media stop to step back and say, look at this guy individually. And there's very few who do what you did there, which is assume journalistically the position of a sports director, a football director, and say, okay, just in practical terms, what is the Bale asset, and how do we measure that against the rest of the team? And how do we measure the Bale asset against the continuity of a manager who in his 11 games has looked utterly different from the Zidane in charge last time? In that, one, he's pointed at a puddle of mud, told everybody to avoid it, and then he's walked straight back into it. Because a year ago, he was the one saying desperate change is needed. I don't see a competitive attitude. There are real problems. It's healthy if I walk away. And he walks back into the same problems with 11 games of the season left. For a guy who I like and admire, Zidane's attitude to what he's done in coming back then instead of at the end of the season is utterly baffling to me, Ger. And Bale is a partial recipient of those problems, because right now everybody's pointing at each other, shouting and snarling. I know they've found time to. If elite level football has been transferred to walking football, then I see the reason for renewing Toni Kroos. Otherwise, no chance. This is the guy who spent all season walking in the midfield, going, "Oh, there's an opponent running past me. Well, that's lovely. Look at aerodynamically how he performs. Unbelievable.
So if that's the case, and presumably the scouts at all the top clubs have established that Gareth Bale is still Gareth Bale, then suddenly the market for him is much hotter than we would have anticipated, maybe.
Not in value for money, no. It's not. You have to look at the ridiculous amount that he's being paid. You have to look at the fact that Real Madrid are an utter contradiction in it. They're not going to give him away. You know, they're not going to give him a freedom card, which they sometimes do to players. You know, so clubs who want Gareth Bale, there's a mountain of problems. One, Gareth Bale looks at the clubs who want him and isn't particularly attracted by them. Life in Madrid is, as far as he's concerned, given that he's idiosyncratic in terms of elite footballers, he loves life in Madrid. He's extremely stubborn, doesn't particularly want to leave. And if clubs come in, like you pointed out there, one, Madrid will be asking a high price. Two, the salary is huge. Three, Gareth Bale regards himself as an absolute elite player. There are very few clubs he would deign to join. And finally, I think he and his agent have a suspicion, I think they might be right, that they'll outlast Zidane.
Right. So he could still be there through Christmas.
Through Christmas? Are you thinking this is? I love your 1914-18 sort of illusion. Do you think Florentino Perez is saying to his staff, "Don't worry, it'll all be over by Christmas"?
Because I'd assumed they were going to double down on Zidane and back him in the transfer market this summer, give him the players that he wants, and allow him to try and introduce that.
They will. Of course they will. You're right. But will Zidane? Right. Okay. So my Kroos point was I expressed it in a mean fashion. But Kroos is a shadow of the player he was. If they believe that suddenly the summer holidays and slightly better players around him will transform into a player who runs and works, best of luck to you, because he's still extremely talented. But the idea about watching, I won't use the full expression at breakfast, but a crap show like this, and imagining that it's a retouching job, there's integral rehabilitation of competitive attitudes to be done. There are players in that squad who've been scarred for good and bad, indelibly scarred by having the glut of Champions League trophies. And many of those won't be renewed as competitive beasts until they get put out of their comfort zone into another club. And then finally, there are some of those who remain. Marcelo and Kroos, I imagine, they've sold their own goalkeeper. And Courtois is a brilliant goalkeeper, but it hasn't worked at Real Madrid. I don't mind them reinvesting in him and thinking that they can restart him. But Keylor is by far the better performing goalkeeper. They're going to keep Marcelo. They're going to keep Kroos. There is no feel, Ger, of Zidane being given or being able to author a change so dramatic that things will be right by August, September. They might be. And from my perspective, I enjoy when Real Madrid play well. I enjoy Zidane as a football character. I think he's elegant. I think he's funny. I think he's inspirational. And I enjoyed his coaching time. He may not yet be the most brilliant strategist the football world has ever seen, but he's a presence of worth and elegance in Spanish and world football. But right now, the direction in which they're going for their restart really makes me concerned. Really does.
It seems to me that Zidane's, let's imagine his dream summer is get Paul Pogba in, get Luka Jovic in, get Eden Hazard in, and let's just pretend that they are the three targets that will make Zidane a happy man this summer. But if, for example, you can't get one or perhaps you can't get two of them in without Gareth Bale leaving the club, and Gareth Bale is happy enough to play golf for €17 million a year, then I do wonder, does he have the capability in his personality to hold a grudge against that player? What sort of Zinedine Zidane would we then see?
I think that Zidane is a complex mix of his own man, in that he said last week, and he didn't throw this out, he was asked it. But he said, if there's any interference with my team selection, then I'll leave. Now, even though he was asked about, and that was based around the fact that he wants to promote his son, Luka, to be number 2 goalkeeper, when there are a lot of doubts that Luka still is at that stage, age-wise, ability and experience, that he should be number 3 goalkeeper. And use that on as an example. When a coach like Zidane, who's just come back with the playing and managerial CV that he's got at Real Madrid, is already using the phrase, I'd walk, it's a Freudian slip. So I worry about his attitude to the job in front of him. However, in terms of directly your question, I think he remains in many aspects a company guy, a Florentino Perez guy. So if Florentino says the way in which we rebuild means that Gareth Bale doesn't get in your playing squad and that we tough it out, it comes to the end of the market, Eoin, and there hasn't been a move for Bale that he'll accept, or that the club will accept, but they still want to do what they're doing now to Bale, then the idea that they might leave him out of their playing squad and pay him when he's not even got a ticket to play football is brutal. I hope it doesn't happen. They could. It is feasible that they could do it. I think it would be a degradation of the club, a degradation of Gareth Bale's reputation. I absolutely wish this not to take place. But Real Madrid is the kind of club, and maybe there are other big clubs who would do it. I don't mean Real Madrid alone. They could name their registered players, and let's not say Gareth Bale, but a player that they wanted rid of. They could, in this system, feasibly leave him off their playing staff and have him sitting twiddling his thumbs. And I hope that any footballer in that situation would say, okay, as much as I like it here, I've had my chips and I'm off. So my preference, because I enjoy watching Gareth Bale play, and I think his achievements have been gargantuan, my preference is that he finds a new home and extends his playing career, the exceptional last phase of his playing career, by winning more trophies and sticking 2 fingers up to Real Madrid from another jersey with another badge. But do I honestly right now think that is the way that this is going to be resolved? I quite frankly, I don't.
I want to ask you about Barcelona, Graham, and Xavi, who's obviously retired from football, has spoken about his playing career. He says you can't just get straight into a Ferrari, but he ultimately says that he does want to end up at Barcelona. I do wonder if there are worse things that Barcelona can do as a football structure than bringing Xavi in some respect, be it with the B team, even as an assistant coach in that respect, or anything, because this is just as important this summer for Barcelona as it is for Real Madrid. They are chasing something that is kind of harder to chase, I think, than domestic league. It is the Champions League. It is this intangible thing, and they are looking for something, whether it is that centre back in Matthijs de Ligt or whatever it may be. But the intangible thing that they need, maybe the spirit that Xavi could bring back to the club, could be a vital component as well.
I do agree with you. If this was a laboratory experiment, then I agree with your point. I think it's really well made. In terms of likelihood, first of all, it's been a privilege for me to be around him during his playing career, a privilege to know him. He's become certainly my top 2 or 3 favourite footballers ever. I'm sad that he's retired, but time ticks. Talented man speaks with forked tongue, Eoin, and I don't mean you. Xavi saying these nice expressions he's got don't get to the nub of the fact that the deal is set. Victor Font is his friend. Victor Font is the candidate who will stand and expects to win. I think legitimately expects to win in 2021 when Barcelona have presidential elections. Xavi will be his coach. Xavi's perspective is just a hint different from what you quoted. You quoted him accurately, but in here, in the calculating brain that he's got, the idea is that he finishes coaching badges in May in Las Rosas in Spain. He carries on coaching and learning in some aspects and fulfilling his very lucrative contract in Qatar. He's got 2 very young kids. He gets 2 years further down the line with that, with living, as he called it when I was out there a couple of times interviewing and filming him. He said, I like living outside the bubble. And it's really interesting. When I was last in Porto, which was 4 or 5 weeks before Iker Casillas' shocking heart attack, he used the same expression. I didn't ask him about Xavi. I said, why are you still here? He said, it's brilliant. He said, I love being outside the bubble. I think we misunderstand or underappreciate the intensity of constant pressure on these guys. And therefore, while Xavi is much more depressurized than Iker, he's been away longer, I think that his attitude is that 2 more valuable years of preparation, of family development, and waiting until it's a clean slate and he takes over with Valverde, or if anybody replaces Valverde, he takes over rather than being on their staff. And if you imagine, I think that although Valverde and Xavi have a different attitude to how Barcelona should be playing, Xavi's respect is patently very, very high for Valverde and what he's achieved. But if he's on the staff, Owen, then the first time that Valverde has a bad result, the media are full of promote Xavi, get rid of Valverde. That's a marriage I don't see working.
Graham, last question for you. The Italian papers this morning are full of the fact that Juve are particularly interested in Maurizio Sarri, and this might all work out for everybody because the English papers think that Chelsea actually want Frank Lampard to be their manager as opposed to Maurizio Sarri, who is their current manager. And well, we all know that Chelsea don't really like paying managers off, as we've learned with Antonio Conte. The manager,
they don't like it, but they do. But they do it.
Eventually,
they might not like it.
Eventually,
they paid a lot of money out.
What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, Sarri to Juventus is enticing as a comic book story. Whether the personality of the brand of football compared to the squad is right, I'm not sure. If the educated Italian media, and this is all a Di Marzio story, it initiates with Di Marzio, who I'm sure is a very good Italian journalist, but because he got the Pep thing right, every time he writes, everybody says, "Oh, it's biblically true. You can stand on this story." I'd have thought that what we're understanding that Cristiano Ronaldo is a strong word and the coach he wants next because that's Cristiano. Whether Sarri and Cristiano are compatible in football or personal terms, I would wait and see. The idea that a powerhouse like Juventus began to play Sarri-style football and gave him the component parts that he needed, which matched with the way that they gave him component parts at Napoli, and it's differed with the fact that he's grafting on his attitude and his style to a squad which hasn't been grafted towards his needs. If he was at Juventus and he was given that kind of resources, it would be a hugely exciting prospect. And if they could begin to play football the way that Chelsea began, the way that Napoli did at Juventus, it would like a beacon to draw the admiration and the world recognition that Juve crave. Whether Sarri there would work or not, I have my doubts. Whether Frank Lampard is ready to jump into the Chelsea offer, I would warn him to be very careful and check the state of the club before he took that call.
Graham, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.